Have you guys ever heard of Pearl Davis? She's an internet personality, mostly focused in the red pill, as I will explain. Pearl Davis, also known as Just Pearly Things. Maybe her channel name is different right now. Not really sure. I think she goes by Pearl TV right now, if I'm not mistaken. She was born on November 4th, 1996. The city where she grew up is called Huntley, in the state of Illinois. She was raised Catholic, so she has a religious background. She's oftentimes very critical of religion and religious people, and it's safe to say that she's either not religious or not very seriously religious. So it can be either of those possibilities. On YouTube, when she first started, Pearl experienced a lot of growth by doing street interviews, mostly in England, with people, asking them questions about touchy subjects that are very sensitive to most people, like women's rights and modern dating standards. She talked about a lot of other things as well, but those are the top two things that she usually talks about, with other things that kind of run downstream from those topics. A lot of times in her videos, one can see the interviewees become visibly upset and argumentative with Pearl, which has to do with the nature of her questioning. But Pearl doesn't shy away from this. On the contrary, what she does do is she relishes in triggering other people and making them upset, and uses that as sensationalized content in order to gather views and clicks for her channel. So this is her overall marketing strategy. Get people upset by asking them a question that could be about a topic that's serious, but do it in a way that makes it seem like there is a bias, which she obviously has a bias, and get people upset in order to generate drama, which is what a lot of people ultimately want to see, is drama. Some of her claims that she's made were that women should not have the right to vote. Another one is that divorce should be illegal, that men should not waste their time getting married, and that it's okay for men to cheat, but not for women to cheat. So definitely not somebody who is unbiased or as rational as she claims to be. She's oftentimes providing little to no nuance in her arguments. It's usually just black or white. There's little wiggle room in her worldview. She's adamantly pro-male. That means that men can do no wrong, which is similar to how a lot of feminists are adamantly pro-female in the way that women can do no wrong, which obviously neither of these worldviews is true. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, this kind of thinking is considered black or white thinking. People who are guilty of this kind of thinking, they tend to see reality in a binary on or off, 0 and 1, all or nothing kind of way instead of different shades of gray, which is oftentimes how reality is, especially when it comes to human relationships and human behavior. Pearl is definitely guilty of this because she seems to always presume male innocence and female guilt. So that is her initial premise. Same way that many feminists see it the opposite way. They start off with a premise of female innocence and male guilt. That's not how you conduct any sort of credible research, obviously. It's no wonder that she calls herself an anti-feminist. Some have even called her the quote-unquote female Andrew Tate, which is not too surprising. She has a lot of similarities with Andrew Tate, just in a female version, and without the other crime that I talked about in my previous videos that Andrew Tate committed. Now let's look at some of her quotes. One quote says, "Tattoos are trashy. Fake eyelashes are trashy. Heavy makeup is trashy. Giant hoop earrings are trashy. Getting fat is trashy." It's a very interesting and direct quote, even though it's brash. But it does have a lot of truth to it, despite the lack of nuance and grace in which she delivers this statement. Of course, one can argue that this quote does make sense, which, in my opinion, it does, though I wouldn't say it quite like that. But how do you explain it to people who don't agree with this? What if somebody thinks that those things are not, as she calls it, trash? So even though there's some objective truth, as you can see, in what she is saying, her delivery was not the best. It was horrible, and it fails to communicate the nuance that I mentioned earlier. So she can definitely work on her communication skills if she hopes to reach a wider audience. Let's look at another one of her quotes. The other quote is, "How can we improve as women if we are constantly lied to by simps and older women about what men want? We're told men are perfectly okay with overweight, old, single mothers. This is not true, regardless of how many exceptions you want to bring up." End quote. Again, this quote is overly simplistic, despite having some grain of truth in it. But the truth is oftentimes hidden by a bunch of nonsense and a bunch of garbage comments. Regardless of one's sex or gender, no one wants to be with someone that they don't find physically attractive. But it rings true because standards today have risen tremendously. So that's why this quote does have a ring of truth to it. Both men and women today don't have healthy standards, but Pearl only mentions one side. Now let's move on to my analysis of Pearl. Pearl is a woman who, as I mentioned earlier, speaks in binary language, this or that, black or white. Oftentimes, she doesn't elaborate on what she says until after she says something provocative, in order to garner attention. So she says something provocative, she gets eyeballs on her, and then she presumes to give some sort of nuance. But that nuance is shallow. It's not real nuance. Her main goal is to get eyeballs on her. One can say that she's simply being a smart businesswoman. Isn't that what a lot of business people do, especially on YouTube? But I'd argue that her methods are extreme and oftentimes backfire on her. And this is evident by the fact that she receives a lot of hate online, whether that hate is justified or not. She seems to suffer from some sort of emotional vacuum that was not filled. Which surprises me because both of her parents were successful and were present in her life. Yet she still seeks that validation, mainly male attention, something that she couldn't quite get as she was growing up, as is evident by her behavior. She's also guilty of the same crimes that she accuses women of doing, and that make them unattractive. For example, she says women should be more feminine and agreeable. But when you observe her behavior and the way that she conducts herself in her interviews, whether they're street interviews or interviews that are done in a studio, she is neither of those things. In fact, she's actually more argumentative and more masculine in her approach than the very women that she criticizes, so she loses credibility in that regard. This tells me that her efforts are not really genuine, and that she's not genuinely interested in helping men for the most part, though there might be some sort of benefit for men that they can derive from her content. I just don't see how most of it is helpful in any way, though. Especially since ultimately she is not a man, she doesn't really understand what men go through in the dating market, so how can she possibly speak on it? The only thing she is interested in is amassing an army of lonely and miserable men to pay her to validate their negative emotions about women, and in turn, they also get validated, and she gets a lot of emotional attention from other men. Something that, as I mentioned earlier, she cannot seem to find with one man who will completely devote to her, which is something that's very sad to mention. So I don't say that to make fun of her. I just say that as something that's unfortunate that is happening to her, and I wish that she is able to get the help that she needs in order to improve herself and get what she wants, because as far as I'm concerned, everybody deserves somebody to love them in that regard. Only a few people are able to handle no relationship whatsoever and be satisfied with their lives. If a man were doing what she was doing to men, but they were doing it to other women, it would rightly be considered abuse, particularly emotional abuse. But since Pearl is a woman, and she's the one who's doing it, no one seems to bat an eye, which again is ironic considering the fact that she rails so much against female privilege, yet she doesn't seem to mind her own privileges in many ways. Just an interesting observation that I've made about her. Like I said, the irony is palpable. Even her followers either don't see it or refuse to acknowledge it because of the benefits, whatever meager and shallow benefits they're receiving from this. Finally, Pearl strikes me as someone who is shallow and narcissistic. She's only interested in seeking attention that she cannot get romantically from men. Therefore, since she cannot get a man to commit to her, she settles for insulting women just to get fake validation from men who feel miserable and sad. And instead of directing them to professional help or offering that help herself, not necessarily professional, but more in a self-development sense, she nurtures their bitterness and wants it to grow because she suffers from it as well. The only difference is she makes money from it and they don't. In all, while her content can be informative, I would say that Pearl is mostly a negative source of information on dating because she doesn't follow what she preaches. She's only interested in gathering attention through whatever means necessary, whether it's positive or negative, including making provocative and incendiary statements. Her main view and her main goal is to garner views, to garner attention that she couldn't get from a suitable high-quality male, so she settles for this low-quality form of attention in order to fill the emotional vacuum that she currently feels. If you like this content, make sure you hit the like button, that you subscribe, that you comment, that you share this video. Thank you for watching.